Hope Unlimited. Oh, this is cool because then, if you hang on long enough, this is my history, you'll have a partner. Yes. I will provide that. Good music.
What happened?
Oh, we know she's in the counseling business. I think if she stays it long enough, she'll have a partner. Okay, so I'm going to give you all clinical scenarios, and then I'll ask a bunch of questions about those clinical scenarios. Okay. Some of them are based on true life. Let's see. Let's think of one. I like to say that this is a safe environment. Right? So I may tell a little bit of a story about perhaps someone in here. Okay? Now, you may deny that it involves you. I understand it. Done. Okay? Very few of you, I think, really know Abby. You probably think of Abby as kind of a serious, quiet student, where really outside of class she's a wild one. Yeah. In fact, those who know, we don't even call her Abby. We just call her Abs. Am I right?
Yeah, actually.
There we go. It's true. It's true. In fact, Abby had a twin sister, Tabby. Tabs. It was Tabs and Abs. Tabs was wild too. In fact, Tabs probably was a little too wild. And I'm going to just tell you the story of her demise. One day, after a wild night of coke, she comes home and she starts having severe chest discomfort. Chest tightness, heaviness. When I give you that positive Levine sign, it means like the heaviness. Okay, she started, it felt like it was radiating to the shoulder, maybe up the neck. She started becoming a little short-winded, diaphoretic. And at first, she thought, well, maybe this is just the effects of coke. Okay. Maybe it'll wear off. So she ignored it. She, in fact, instead of going to the emergency room like a lot of people would, she thought, well, I just need a little something for pain. Okay. So she took some of her mom's vitamins. But the discomfort, she could still feel it throughout the night. And finally, she started getting dizzy, lightheaded. And the next thing you know, Abs finds her in her bedroom, almost passed out. She barely arousable, what we call untended. Okay. Means she was arousable, but only with stimulation, either verbal or physical. Otherwise, she'd tend to fall asleep. In fact, she calls 911. By the time we get Tabs to the ER, she's just hanging on. You can imagine that her blood pressure is falling. It's down to 70/50. Heart rate is up to 120. Okay. Her respiratory rate is 28 and shallow. Safety wrong. Her extremities at this point are kind of cold and clammy. Urine output? What do you think of urine output is? Think she's peeing a lot? They put a Foley catheter in, very little, maybe 25 cc's residual. That's only, there's nothing in there.
What's that called?
Polyuria. Polyuria. She's not peeing much.
And then apnuria, or what is it?
Anuria. Okay. So let's look at her. So one of the things they do is they start some IV fluids and they start giving her some medications to hopefully bring up her blood pressure. But in the meantime, they get some ABGs. Okay, these are our gases. Sarah, how would you interpret these blood gases?
Her pH is low, so she has an acidosis. Then we move to the CO2, which is low. So it's not a respiratory acidosis because they would need to move in the opposite direction. And then we move to the bicarb, which is low. So we know that it's metabolic acidosis because the pH and the bicarb would move in the same direction.
Yeah. So keep going.
And then, so we go back up to the CO2 to see if there's compensation, and it looks like there is because it's low.
So how would you then put it together? You'd say this acid-base disturbance is a
Primary metabolic acidosis with respiratory compensation.
right. So that had she not had respiratory compensation, this pH would be even lower. So what she's doing is creating a respiratory alkalosis to counter the acidosis.
Okay,
Right? That's what compensation is.
right.
You create either a respiratory or metabolic acid-base disturbance, but in the opposite direction to bring the pH back towards normal. So very good for part one.
How do we know it's primary?
It's primary because
The pH is low.
pH is low. Primary is what's related to the pH. Now, Sarah, what I need to ask you now is, given the clinical scenario, why in the world would she have a metabolic acidosis?
Because of the drugs?
Well, I can see if she had a respiratory acid-base disturbance. Although cocaine probably wouldn't do that.
Okay.
Cocaine is more of a stimulant.
Okay, so narcotics and that issue is the respiratory.
Yeah, that's probably more likely. Whereas amphetamines and cocaine would be stimulants. They're going to increase sympathomimetic activity.
Okay.
Okay. But look here. What do you think's going on? Her EKG. Did I talk about her EKG? Let me give you some background on it. When they did the EKG, it looked like she had ST segment elevation across the anterior precordial leads, which would correlate with a fairly large anterior MI.
Oh,
Does that help you? So she has, it sounds like a cocaine-induced MI.
yeah.
Now take it from there.
Okay, so what was the question again?
Well, what's the cause of her primary metabolic acidosis? Now that we know she's got a cocaine-induced MI.
The MI is, that's her,
Blood pressure.
oh,
What are the-
okay, so it's lowering her blood pressure, which.
So wait, hold on, stop 1 second. What are the factors that influence blood pressure?
Influence blood pressure,
Volume.
yeah.
What else? Systemic vascular resistance. And what's the third factor that influences blood pressure? Cardiac output. Okay, which of those three factors do you think is causing her blood pressure to drop? Cardiac output. She's had a massive MI. So her cardiac output has fallen, and with that, she's had a drop in blood pressure. Okay, that's good. So let's go back to our question for Sarah. Why now does she have a metabolic acidosis?
I'm trying to put it all together in my head. Okay, so less is being filtered because less blood is reaching the kidneys.
I like your chain of reasoning. That she's developing some kind of acute renal insufficiency.
Uh-huh.
So she's not filtering organic acids. It takes time though
Okay.
for you to have an acidosis on the basis of renal insufficiency. It's not going to happen within a couple hours of the episode. Okay, so that's not quite the reason. But I like your thought. I like the thought process. what does blood do? What does it carry? Oxygen. And so when your cardiac output drops, what do you think happens to perfusion of tissues? It increases? It decreases. It decreases. You're not generating the pressure that drives blood flow. So the blood flow to the tissues is going to fall.
Oh, okay.
And
So then she would go into, she would be producing lactic acid because of the
Anaerobic metabolism.
Okay.
So if you're not delivering enough oxygen to tissues, then they can carry out glycolysis, anaerobic metabolism, but it stops there. The product of anaerobic metabolism is pyruvate, but in order for pyruvate to get converted to acetyl-coenzyme A and enter into the Krebs cycle, you need oxygen. And without enough oxygen, instead what happens is the pyruvate simply builds up and gets converted to lactic acid. And lactic acid is like any other acid, it releases hydrogen. And it's that hydrogen that triggers the metabolic acidosis. Everybody with me? Okay. Now, Sarah, help me. She's got a metabolic acidosis. What's triggering the hyperventilation? Respiratory 28.
The respiratory control centers are being stimulated.
Right, so she's triggering a chemoreceptor mediated respiratory reflex.
Right.
What are the three factors that stimulate this reflex?
The respiratory reflex, a decrease in pH, an increase in CO2, or a decrease in O2.
Right. So she's dropping her pH.
Right.
Okay. So now, we kind of know why her blood pressure is low now. We know why she's hyperventilating. Why isn't she peeing?
Because her blood volume is decreased.
So her,
Filtrate is.
Right. So her body is releasing ADH and telling it to hold on to fluid, well, to sodium and water.
well, that's part of it. That's part of it. That's kind of a reinforcing mechanism. But remember what happens when your blood pressure starts to fall below 90. Okay?
Saturation.
Let's say our blood pressure is 70 over 50. Let's figure this out. What would be our mean arterial pressure here? It would be diastolic plus a third of the pulse pressure. So it would be 50 plus a third of 20, let's just say 21 to make it easy, would be 7. 7.
Are we gonna have to do all of this?
Oh, I'm just kind of taking you through this. I'm talking about for life now. This is
Okay.
not for this. I'm probably not gonna ask you this, except on the final. But hopefully you'll be exempt,
Yes.
okay? But in real life, would you have to be able to figure this out? Yeah. Okay, so ordinarily our mean arterial pressure at the level of the aorta would be much higher than 57. Ordinarily, someone coming in with an acute distress, they can have a blood pressure, let's say, of 150 over 90. Okay, so that would be 90 plus a third of 60, 90 plus 20, 110. Yeah, this person's starting out with a mean arterial pressure of 57. Okay. So do you think that by the time, as pressure leaves the aorta and it travels to the renal artery, and then ultimately to the afferent arteriole and glomerular capillaries, ordinarily as blood moves, the pressure falls. So by the time this mean pressure of 57 reaches the glomerulus, it's going to be pretty low. It's not going to be 30. It might be 20. And so when you figure out the net filtration pressure, it's going to be 0. Okay, it's just too. So So what happens here is the net filtration pressure is too low in order to produce filtrate.
Okay.
There's no driving force.
So there's no hydrostatic.
There's no glomerular hydrostatic pressure. It's like, okay, I'm fixing some coffee, and instead of pouring in 4 cups, okay, I pour in a teaspoon of water. There's not going to be any weight, any force generated to drive filtration. So I'm not going to, even though I put in 2 full scoops of coffee grounds, I'm not going to form a filtrate. Now, of course, also, when blood pressure drops like that, you're going to stimulate the sympathetic nervous system. Remember we said when blood pressure falls below 90. Okay, and the sympathetic nervous system is going to cause the afferent arteriole to do this. Yeah, it's going to vasoconstrict. So we're going to shunt blood from the kids to more vital organs. Yeah, we'll compromise the kidneys right now to preserve the heart and the brain. Now, if you were to measure, now the sympathetic nervous system is going to activate what, by the way? What's the sympathetic nervous system going to activate? Yeah, that's one of the triggers for the renin-angiotensin mechanism. And so, ultimately, with renin production, you're gonna form angiotensin II and aldosterone. Okay. Aldosterone is going to tell the kidneys if there is any filtrate being formed, hold on to salt. Angiotensin II is going to what? Cause more vasoconstriction. Okay, so here we have a patient who's not perfusing the extremities very much, and on top